My name is Irene Betts. I'm 29 years old, and I learned the hard way that love doesn't always die in a fiery argument. Sometimes it dies slowly, drowned out by comparisons whispered over wine glasses and scrolled across phone screens. The first time Chris compared me to someone else, I laughed it off. We were at a friend's party, the air thick with the smell of grilled steaks and spilled beer. Jade, Sarah's wife, was at the grill, flipping food with one hand and gesturing dramatically with the other as she told some story about closing another huge deal at her firm. Everyone's attention was on her. She had that natural commanding energy that filled every corner of the backyard. Chris nudged me with his elbow, his eyes fixed on her. God, look at Jade. She just has this presence, you know. Sarah says she's already up for another promotion. Irene, when are you going to go for a promotion at your job? He said it with a crooked smile, his tone light, almost playful, like it was nothing, like it was just a casual question. I squeezed his hand, forcing a chuckle. I'm pretty happy where I'm at, Chris. My team's solid. My hours let me actually spend time with you. Isn't that worth something? He hummed a sound that wasn't quite agreement, wasn't quite dismissal. And then almost absently, his gaze drifted back to Jade. It was such a small moment. A flicker, really. I told myself not to make a big deal of it. But I felt something in my stomach tighten, a warning bell muffled under the laughter of our friends. At first, the comments came like drops of rain, occasional, easy to ignore. We'd be watching a movie, and a character would pull up in some sleek, ridiculous car. Chris would sigh and say, "That's the kind of car Jade drives. Must be nice, huh?" Then he'd pat my knee like that softened the sting. Or I'd spend an entire Saturday drilling holes in our balcony wall, setting up the floating shelves he wanted for his plants. When he came home, instead of the excitement I expected, he'd glance once and say, "Oh, Sarah mentioned Jade just hired a professional decorator for their place. Money's no object for them. It's probably going to be in a magazine." Every time my efforts felt smaller, cheaper, like my love was constantly being measured against Jade's salary slip and found wanting. But I loved Chris. I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that it was just idle chatter, harmless observations. I wanted to believe that. What I didn't realize was that comparisons, when repeated, start to rot even the strongest foundation. Still, I tried. Our anniversary was coming up, and I wanted to remind him why we worked, why we mattered. I didn't plan a trip to Bali. I didn't buy him designer clothes or a Rolex. Instead, I booked a table at Il Tramonto, the cozy Italian restaurant where we'd had our very first date. The walls were terracotta, the candles melted into old wine bottles, and Giovanni, the owner, always greeted us by name. I ordered his favorite wine, the overpriced Cabernet, from our Napa trip, the one I'd saved months for. As I sat waiting, heart pounding, I told myself this night could reset us, remind us of the love that wasn't about status or money. Then Chris walked in. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked stunning, sharp suit, new haircut, a faint whiff of cologne I didn't recognize. He smiled, but it was tight, like the evening was already something to endure. "You look amazing," I said softly, pouring the wine. "Thanks," he replied, scanning the room. "This place is cozy as ever." That word, cozy. It landed like a stone in my chest. It sounded small, ordinary, not enough. We talked, but it was stilted. His eyes wandered to his phone more than to me, and then his entire face lit up brighter than it had all night. Not for me, not for us. "Oh my God," he said, turning the screen toward me. An Instagram post. Sarah had uploaded a photo of a diamond bracelet captioned, "Just because. Jade spoils me rotten." Chris's eyes softened with longing as he whispered, "Look at that. Can you believe it? Sarah told me Jade just surprised her with it. No reason at all. Just because." I forced a smile, though my throat felt tight. That's a lot of diamonds. "It's not about the diamonds, Irene." His voice sharpened, setting the phone down. "It's about the gesture. It's about wanting to give your partner the world. It's effort." The words hit me harder than I expected. Because wasn't this night effort, booking our first date table, choosing his favorite wine? Wasn't I trying desperately to show him he was my world? But he didn't see it. He didn't want this. He wanted someone else's version of love. And in that moment, I felt it, the ghost of another woman sitting between us, invisible but suffocating. That night was supposed to save us. Instead, it planted the seed of the question I'd soon hear blunt and cold. Why can't you be more like her? But back then, I still held on. I still believed love could outlast comparison. I was wrong. It didn't stop at the anniversary dinner. If anything, that night unlocked something in Chris, like he realized it was safe to say the quiet part out loud. The comparisons kept coming, but they weren't casual anymore. They carried a weight, a sharpness, as if each word was a knife carefully sliding between my ribs. We'd be sitting on the couch, half watching some glossy drama on Netflix when he'd sigh. See that house? That's the kind of place Jade would buy Sarah one day. Big windows, rooftop garden. Can you imagine? I'd smile weakly, staring at the TV, but not really seeing it. Our apartment was modest, yes, but it was ours. I'd painted the walls myself. I'd hung the curtains he picked out. Every corner held a memory. Yet to him, all of it had shrunk into not enough. I noticed other shifts, too. When I cooked his favorite pasta, the one his mother taught me, he'd thank me distractedly, then mention how Sarah had posted photos of Jade's 5-course wine-paired dinner at some Michelin-starred place. When I spent hours repotting his plants, my fingers stained with soil, he'd say, "It's nice, but Jade just bought Sarah a whole greenhouse unit. Isn't that amazing?" Even when I poured myself into small acts of love, Chris's words drained the color out of them, leaving only gray. And every time he thought he was just making conversation. One Saturday, I came home balancing 3 heavy grocery bags, sweat running down my back. Chris was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He glanced up, then back down. "Maya just bought Sarah this designer watch. Like, just because. Did you see it on her story?" Something inside me snapped. My voice was sharper than I intended. "Do you even realize how often you bring her up?" Chris blinked as if I had spoken in another language. "What, I'm just telling you things. Why are you being so sensitive?" "Because it's constant." My voice cracked. "Do you hear yourself? Every time I do something, you hold it up against Jade or Maya, and somehow I always lose." For a second, I thought he'd soften, that he'd see me the woman who had carried those bags up 3 flights of stairs, who made his life easier in 100 unseen ways. Instead, he sighed, rubbing his temple. "Irene, it's not a competition. I want us to have more, to be more." But wasn't that exactly what he'd turned it into, a race against shadows? A finish line that kept moving further away. At night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing. My chest felt heavy, my mind replaying every just because gift Jade gave Sarah, every glamorous trip Maya flaunted. I started to wonder if Chris even saw me anymore, or if he only saw the reflection of everyone else's lives projected like a movie onto our bedroom ceiling. The tension between us became a low, constant hum. Some days it was a faint static in the background. Other days it roared so loud I could barely breathe. And yet I still loved him. Or maybe I loved the memory of who he used to be, the boy who once biked across town in the rain, just to bring me soup when I was sick, the man who held my hand in the dark when my father passed away. But that man felt further away with each comparison. I told myself it was a phase, that he was just restless, that if I held on tightly enough, if I poured enough love into the cracks, maybe the ground beneath us would stop shifting. What I didn't realize then was that the ground wasn't shifting, it was eroding, and the collapse was coming. Our anniversary was supposed to be a reset button. I told myself that if I planned something thoughtful, something that reminded Chris of us, of the quiet magic we once had, then maybe the comparisons would stop. Maybe he'd look at me and see the woman he'd fallen in love with, not the shadow of someone else's partner. So I booked us a table at Il Tramonto, the place where we'd had our first date. The walls glowed with terracotta warmth, the candles dripping wax onto darkened wine bottles. Giovanni, the owner, greeted me by name and winked, slipping me the wine list. He knew I was after the Cabernet Chris had fallen in love with in Napa, a bottle I'd saved for months to afford. I sat at our table, heart-pounding fingers tracing the rim of the glass. This had to work. It had to. Then Chris walked in. My breath caught. He looked striking in a sleek new suit, hair perfectly styled, the faint scent of expensive cologne following him. But the expression on his face wasn't excitement. It was restraint, like he'd walked into a meeting he didn't want to attend. "You look amazing," I said, smiling as I poured his wine. "Thanks." He gave a quick glance around the restaurant. "This place is cozy as ever." Cozy. That word again. Small. Insignificant. I swallowed hard and tried to ignore how it landed like a stone in my chest. We made it through appetizers on shaky conversation. He scrolled his phone more than he looked at me. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, to wait for the moment when the night might shift. But then his face lit up brighter than it had all evening. "Oh my God," he murmured, turning the screen toward me. An Instagram post. A glittering photo of a diamond necklace laid on velvet. Sarah had captioned it, "Just because nights are the best nights. Jade the Great. Spoiled rotten. Chris's eyes shone as if he'd just seen a miracle. Look at that. Can you believe it? Jade just gave that to Sarah for no reason, just because. My chest tightened. I forced a smile. That's a lot of diamonds. It's not about the diamonds, Irene. His voice sharpened, setting the phone down like a gavel. It's the gesture. It's about effort. Wanting to give your partner the world. Effort. The word rang in my ears like a cruel joke. I wanted to scream that this night, this table, this wine I'd sacrificed months of saving for was effort. That my entire love for him was carved out in small, everyday acts he no longer even noticed. But my throat locked. I couldn't get the words out. Our main courses arrived. I'd ordered his favorite osso buco, hoping it would soften him. Instead, he pushed the meat around the plate with a fork, sighing. It's fine, he muttered. But Sarah said Jade took her to that new Michelin star place downtown. 6-month wait list. Probably cost more than this whole night. Something inside me cracked. I set my fork down. My voice was quiet, trembling. What is it you want from me, Chris? He finally looked up, and his eyes weren't wistful anymore. They were flat, cold. I want what Sarah has. His tone was blunt, merciless. I want a partner who doesn't just play it safe, who doesn't think this. He gestured at the candlelit restaurant, the terracotta walls, the very history of our love is enough. The words slammed into me like stones. Then came the dagger. Why can't you be more like her? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The restaurant faded, the candlelight blurred. My heart felt like glass shattering under pressure. It wasn't Jade anymore. It wasn't an idea. It was Maya, a real person, someone I knew, someone Chris was actively holding me against. I whispered hollow. Why are you even with me then? He didn't answer. He just stared, fork dangling loosely from his hand as if the question had never crossed his mind. That night I walked out of Il Tramonto with my chest hollowed and my ears ringing. The anniversary dinner that was meant to save us had instead buried us. And I knew, though I couldn't yet admit it aloud, that something inside our relationship had died for good at that table. The silence in our apartment that night was different. It wasn't the ordinary silence of two people unwinding after a long day. No faint hum of the TV, no lazy chatter about groceries or deadlines. This was a verdict, heavy, final, the kind of silence that pressed against my chest like a weight. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the familiar clutter of our life together. The coat he always left draped over the chair. The stack of design magazines, the throw blanket we'd bought one winter afternoon when it had snowed too hard to go outside. It all looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. His words played on loop in my head, each one sharper than the last. Why can't you be more like her? I want what Sarah has. This isn't enough. By dawn, the hollow ache inside me had hardened into something else. Not anger, not grief. Certainty. He had shown me who he was, and I finally believed him. The next day, I called in sick to work and began to pack. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw things into garbage bags like they do in movies. I moved through the apartment, slowly, carefully sorting what was mine and what wasn't. I folded my clothes into neat stacks, took my toothbrush, my face cream, my books. I left the sweaters he'd stolen from me, the mugs I'd bought, but he claimed as his. I even left the framed photos of us on the walls. They felt like artifacts of strangers. Box by box, I dismantled the life we'd built. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Chris. Irene, we need to talk. 3 words. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a command. I didn't reply. And for the first time in months, maybe years, that felt like power. When he came home late that afternoon, I was sealing a box of records. His footsteps stopped in the hallway. What are you doing? Packing, I said, not looking up. Irene, stop. We need to talk about last night. I pressed the tape across the cardboard, the rip echoing in the silence. Then I looked at him. His eyes were tired makeup from the night before, smudged faintly at the edges, his expression expectant. He wanted me to cry, to beg, to fight for us, so he could be the magnanimous one, the forgiver. But I didn't give him that script. There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. You were very clear. He flinched just slightly. My calmness unsettled him. Irene, I was upset. You just walked out. What was I supposed to think? I set the box aside and stood. My voice was low, steady. You were supposed to think about what you said, about how you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough, that you wanted someone else. He opened his mouth, closed it, then crossed his arms. So that's it. After 4 years, you're just going to walk away over one fight. I shook my head. It wasn't one fight. It was the last one, the one where you said out loud what you've been feeling all along. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. uncertainty. "You don't want me, Chris," I whispered. "You want an idea of someone else. You want her." His chin lifted defiant. "Is that so wrong?" "To want more. To want a partner who pushes for more, who is more." "Look at Sarah. Look at what Jade gives her. I deserve that. Entitlement, not regret, not sorrow, just entitlement." And in that moment, the last piece of me that wanted to fight for him dissolved. I picked up a box and carried it to the door. He followed, voice rising now. "So that's it. You're just going to run away." I stopped, turning to face him one final time. My words came out like a closing door. "I'm not running away, Chris. I'm walking away. There's a difference." Then I left. The latch clicked softly behind me, quieter than a slammed door, but infinitely more final. That night, I slept on a friend's couch, surrounded by boxes that smelled like my old life. For the first time in years, I fell asleep not with tears, but with silence. A silence that belonged to me. The first week after leaving, Chris passed in a blur of cardboard and cheap takeout containers. I crashed on my friend Nia's couch, my boxes stacked like silent witnesses in the corner. Every night as I lay staring at her ceiling, I expected the pain to consume me, the sobbing breakdowns, the desperate urge to call him back. But it didn't come. What I felt was quiet or stranger. A dull ache, yes, but beneath it a slow burning clarity. Without Chris's constant comparisons humming in the background, I could finally hear my own thoughts again. And for the first time in months, they weren't laced with shame. By the second week, I'd found a short-term lease, a tiny one-bedroom with peeling paint, and a fridge that rattled like an old train. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. But when I slid the key into the lock for the first time, I realized something shocking. It was mine. I unpacked slowly, filling the shelves with my books, tucking blankets into corners, setting up my plants on the windowsill. Each small choice felt like reclaiming something Chris had drained out of me. The silence here wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was freedom. I threw myself into routines that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. I joined a gym not to sculpt myself into someone else's fantasy, but to feel my own body grow stronger. Each drop of sweat on the treadmill felt like proof I was still here, still mine. I started walking home from work instead of taking the bus earbuds in, letting music fill the spaces Chris's criticisms had once occupied. Even at work, I felt a shift. Without his voice in my head reducing everything I did to not enough, I realized I actually liked my job. My projects mattered. My team respected me. I had always been competent. I just hadn't been allowed to believe it. Meanwhile, word about Chris traveled faster than I expected. Mutual friends reached out cautiously, testing the waters. One night I got a text from Nia. Saw Chris with someone new. Finance guy. Flashy, total show-off. Another text a week later. Maya says his name's Derek. Expensive suits, loud laugh. The kind of guy who orders the most expensive bottle just to prove he can. I stared at the screen, a hollow laugh slipping out. Of course, Chris hadn't changed. He'd just swapped me out for a shinier version of the life he thought he deserved. But deep down, I already knew how this story would play out. Because men like Derek weren't Jade. They weren't generous. They weren't truly successful. They were loud, brittle, and quick to show their teeth. Chris had left comfort for chaos, and chaos was about to teach him a lesson. One evening after a late workout, I found myself scrolling through old photos. There we were on the balcony laughing as we painted flower pots. There we were at the beach, sunburned and giddy. I expected to feel grief, but instead I felt distance, like I was looking at actors playing us in a movie I'd once loved but no longer recognized. And somewhere in the middle of those photos, a realization bloomed. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the woman I'd been with him, the one who thought love meant endlessly proving she was enough. But that woman was gone now, and I wasn't going to resurrect her. Nia noticed the change before I did. "You're lighter," she said one Saturday morning as we drank coffee on her balcony, "like you've been carrying bricks for years and finally put them down." I smiled, wrapping my hands around the mug. Maybe I finally realized they weren't my bricks to carry. She grinned. That's my girl. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Of course, Chris wasn't done with me yet. People like him never are. But before he came crawling back, karma was already circling. And I would hear about it in brutal, delicious detail. It started with whispers. A text from Nia lit up my phone one Thursday night. "You didn't hear this from me, but I saw Chris and Derek at the Oak Room. It was brutal." I stared at the screen, heart thudding with a mix of dread and something darker anticipation. Her second message came fast. Derek spent the whole night bragging about his investments, but his jokes were cutting. He mocked Chris's drink order, talked over him, Even made a comment about his shirt being off the rack. I swear Chris's face just crumpled. He looked so small. I read the words 3 times, my chest tightening with something sharp and ironic. This was the life Chris thought he wanted. This was the more he'd traded me for. Not comfort, not kindness, but cruelty wrapped in expensive fabric. Over the next few weeks, updates trickled in like dispatches from a battlefield I no longer had to fight on. Another friend messaged me after a group dinner. Derek snapped at him in front of everyone. Said Chris was lucky to have been tolerated this long. People were stunned. He just laughed like humiliating him was a party trick. I pictured Chris sitting there, his smile faltering, his confidence evaporating under the weight of Derek's contempt. And instead of pity, I felt a cold, steady satisfaction. He had measured me against others until I was nothing. Now, he was the one being measured and found wanting. The final blow came faster than even I expected. One morning, as I sipped coffee in my quiet apartment, Nia sent a string of texts that made me set the mug down. My hands trembling slightly. Update: Derek dumped him. Told Chris he was high maintenance and not worth the effort. I laughed out loud, sharp, breathless. The irony was almost too perfect. He had left me because I wasn't enough. He had begged for more, and now the man he thought was more had discarded him like a cheap trinket. High maintenance, not worth the effort. The very words Chris had thrown at me in softer, subtler ways. Words that had hollowed me out. Now they were his. That same night, my phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m. Irene, I think I made a huge mistake. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, the glow casting shadows on my wall. For months, I had imagined this text. I thought I would feel triumphant or vindicated, or at the very least curious. But I felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, just emptiness. I deleted it. Days later, a voicemail arrived. His voice was thick with tears, shaky and dramatic. Irene, please. He was awful. You were right about everything. I'm so sorry. I just need to hear your voice. Please call me back. I listened once, then erased it. Because I knew what he was really sorry for, not the way he'd treated me, but the fact that his gamble had failed. Then came Sarah, the original messenger of comparison. She called one evening, her tone urgent. Irene, look, Chris is really hurting. You need to be the bigger person here. He's learned his lesson. Just talk to him. I let her words hang in the silence. Then I said quietly, his lessons are no longer my concern. And I hung up before she could sputter a reply. The last attempt wasn't a text or a voicemail or a phone call. It was an ambush. I came home from work one evening to find him waiting by the front steps of my building. His face was pale, eyes puffy, but when he looked at me, it wasn't grief I saw. It was entitlement. You've been ignoring me, he accused, stepping into my path. I have. My voice was calm, steady. After everything, you're just going to be a cold bastard about it. I stopped, finally meeting his gaze. You got what you wanted, Chris. You traded up. I hope it was worth it. I swiped my key fob, walked past him, and let the building door click shut behind me. This time the silence wasn't his weapon. It was mine. And yet I wasn't done moving forward. Because karma wasn't just about watching him fall. It was about stepping into something better. And I didn't know it yet, but soon I would meet someone who saw me not as a comparison, not as a placeholder, but as a choice. Summer had arrived, and with it came the inevitable, a mutual friend's backyard barbecue. I almost didn't go. The thought of running into Chris, seeing his face, his desperation made my stomach twist. But Nia nudged me gently. You can't avoid life forever, Irene. Besides, you won't be alone this time. She was right, I wouldn't be. Because beside me was Samuel. We'd met at the gym of all places, not in some dramatic whirlwind, not with fireworks. Just 2 people spotting each other, talking between sets, and slowly realizing that conversation didn't feel like effort. It felt like breath. Samuel wasn't flashy. He didn't own a Rolex or brag about promotions. What he had was steadiness, a quiet humor, the ability to listen without looking past me to something shinier. And as we walked into that backyard, his hand brushing mine, I felt something I hadn't in years. Safe. The party was alive, with chatter kids running between the tables, the grill sending smoke into the warm air. I was laughing at something Samuel said when I noticed the shift in the crowd, the way eyes flicked toward the corner. Chris was there, alone. He looked thinner, somehow, sharper around the edges, a glass clutched too tightly in his hand. His eyes found me across the lawn, and for a second I saw the calculation in them, the same measuring look he used to cast when comparing me to others. But now he was the one comparing. I saw it in the way his gaze darted to Samuel's hand on my arm, then back to my face. And the bitterness hardened in him like cement. He marched over, just as Samuel excused himself to grab us drinks. So this is why you've been ignoring me. His voice was low, venomous. You moved on that fast. I didn't flinch. Hello, Chris. He sneered. Who is he? Another safe choice. Another average guy who doesn't expect anything from you. I glanced toward Samuel at the drinks table, laughing easily with a stranger. His smile was genuine, unforced. The sight steadied me. No, I said softly. He's someone who doesn't ask me to be anyone else. Chris's face twisted, anger seeping through. You think you're happy? Please. This is just you settling because you couldn't handle a real challenge. A real partner. For a brief moment, I pitied him. Because even now, he still didn't understand. Samuel returned, then setting 2 drinks on the table and sliding effortlessly beside me. He didn't glare, didn't puff his chest. He just stood there calm and present, his hand brushing mine in quiet solidarity. The contrast was blinding. I turned to Chris, my voice steady final. I'm not settling, Chris. For the first time in years, I'm seen. That's all I ever wanted. His mouth opened as if to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I slipped my arm around Samuel's and nodded toward the other side of the yard. Excuse us. We walked away together, laughter from the grill filling the air. I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. The silence that followed us wasn't empty this time. It was full of the life I had built, the love I had found, and the freedom I had fought for. Chris had measured me against others until I broke. But now I was finally standing in a life where no one's shadow loomed over me. And that life was mine.